Fred, who is from Makerere University Business School. He's an ardent economist and policy research maker as well, and he is here to give us also his insights. And I'll start with you, Dr. Muhumuza. Thank you, first of all, so much for sparing time and for joining us. We are discussing how we can promote financial literacy and investment in the East African capital markets. And one of the challenges that we have cited in the first session has been about how our markets are still limited in as far as the local investment is concerned. We have still very few local investors, and the lack of sources of finance in order to be able to invest in our financial markets. Dr. Muhumuza, I would like to get your opinion on what the Uganda Securities Exchange, what the Capital Markets Authority can do in order to promote the local investor base, in order to see that we have more local investors in our East African markets. Doctor, if you can hear me.
Now can hear you, but not so much. I had a connection problem. I don't know whether it's on my side or your side. Can you hear me?
Yes, doctor, we can hear you. Yes, Dr. Fred, we can hear you.
All right, I think I have a connection problem. I don't know whether it is that side or this side, so I didn't get your question very well. If you can just repeat for me briefly.
Okay, Dr. Fred, we are talking about promoting financial literacy and investment in East African capital markets. And one of the challenges that we have cited is the low local investor base and a lack of financing for these investments. What could be some of the options that the Uganda Securities Exchange, the Capital Markets Authority, of course even the Nairobi Securities Exchange, which is on board, can actually put in place in order to increase or improve the number of local investors in our financial markets?
Yeah, I think I still have some connection, but I picked some conversation from the earlier trend that I had. And I'll broadly speak to part of the conversation that I've had earlier, because again, I seem to have some breaks in the communication. In the area of investments, I think there are many issues one needs to bring into the factor to play. One is knowledge. And I think hearing from Ms. Odundo, it is very clear how partners they have brought on board. Quite often programs will target educating the masses rather than also bringing the other players on board. Because as individuals, we are looking at the companies we want to buy into. So you'll find that what Mr. Yebara indicated, the 1.1 involvement or even people knowing about capital markets could be a result of what are their expectations as individuals? Because quite often people want to hear of where returns have been, then they invest their knowledge and learning in those spaces. So if the capital markets and the securities exchange has not made big impact among the peer-to-peers, then people are not about to ask. Somebody has just been talking about the capital chicken. We all know in Uganda there was a scheme that took people's money and then closed the shop and collapsed. Now, people get to hear of those because they will hear from peers that have invested this much, this is how much have flipped out. Now, you want to say, apart from us trying to emphasize financial literacy among the people, what product are we selling? We have seen a lot of discussions going on the IPO for Airtel, and people are referring back to the one of MTN. That was quite some time back. And they're saying, what have we gained out of it? So financial literacy also is going to require and promotion of the capital market and securities exchange, tangible results by those who have been in. And I think that is one of the drugs that people are not interested in hearing that much, trying to investigate and learn more from it, because there's nobody sharing off a good story of what they have picked from this case. which I think for hearing in from the Kenyan Stock Exchange, want also to bring in many other players, throw it into people's spaces and let people make judgments, knowing what it represents, what it can do for them. I think that's one way we want to be able to promote, to make sure it is actually having tangible results that attract people to pick interest and then pick the knowledge that is needed. For now, that's contribution from me. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Fred, for that insightful response there. And Mr. Ever, I don't know if you can agree with me more. The product, if people really want, if we want our local investors to be more interested, then what are we selling to them? I think Dr. Fred makes a very, very good point there. Now, Mr. Ever, just back to you on the matters of financial literacy. Like Dr. Fred has mentioned there, the product is lacking when you look at what we are selling to the public. But also, what can we do in order to promote the integration of the capital markets in East Africa? Because at least Kenya is doing quite well, though of course it has its own challenges like we have seen earlier, but us in the East African community. So how can we leverage the regional integration that we are looking at, the East African community, in order to promote, first of all, financial literacy and investment in our capital markets?
Oh, thank you very much, Anthony. This, I think, should have been a question for Mr. Odondo, but I'll give my 2 thoughts here. Just like the East African integration itself has dragged over the last how many years, it is usually a question of willingness among the different states. Different individuals, different people have reasons why they want to hold on to their own, say, own piece. But when you look at the bigger picture of a market like we have in East Africa, it could actually benefit us as a region if the integration was there. We could talk of systemic issues or process and all that. I think that was easier to be done if the hearts are actually willing to put the work in and have these markets put together. And actually, even in terms of awareness, if you have something done at a regional level and we begin to blow noise around it and to get testimonies from the different areas, then it becomes something that the young people say, like a vibe, like, it is, we make it look cool and look like an area that someone who claims to be aware in terms of financial should look at and be able to consider an investment option. So putting the markets together, merging them, would actually benefit us as a society or as a South African region. But again, this is for the technocrats in the capital markets, in the securities exchange, to put the work together and synchronize. If they are willing to do that, then I think the easier work is to synchronize the process and the systems, and then we'll be able to work together. So this is for really Mr. Odundi to tell us why they are delayed. Because this is clearly something we all need.
Thank you so much, Mr. Every. And yes, Mr. Dundo, this is exactly where we are headed. You've been a board member of the African Exchange Linkage Steering Board, and you've also been a member of the Africa Stock Exchange Association. You've worked with all these associations, and the role of these associations, I believe, is how we can integrate regional and continental capital markets. In your opinion, are we on a journey, a positive journey towards integrating the East African capital markets? Because at the end of the day, when you have a different settlement and the central depository system from Uganda, we're going to have challenges with our Ugandan investors that are investing in the Kenyan market and Kenyan investors that would want to invest in our own market. What would be your say about that, Mr. Dundo?
Yeah, and I do agree with your point about fragmentation. When you have different markets and they're small in size, you've really fragmented the market. And if you're going to look for global investors and you're going to say you want to invest in Kenya or Uganda, for some of them, their minimum size of what they put in is probably the whole market. And so if you can't meet that size of investment flow, the market. So fragmentation is something that we need to be careful about because it will not help us grow our markets. But exchanges are like pride institutions. So every country wants to have its own, just like we all want to have our own airlines. And it's not unique to Africa. I mean, even if you go to Europe today, almost every country has their own exchange, even the smaller countries. I mean, Kazakhstan, Belarus, everybody has their own exchange. So what we're trying to say is that even as we build the journey towards integration, why don't we start by having linkages to allow us to trade or allow cross-border trading to happen? So under the Africa Stock Exchanges Association, we have set up the Africa Exchanges Linkage Project, which is linking 9 markets as a pilot to then allow 29 markets to link. And part of that linkage will also be open to Uganda and Tanzania and East Africa markets. So linkages are going to be it's how you start the journey. And already investors in Nairobi can trade on the linkage, investors in Nigeria, South Africa, etc. What we want to do in East Africa is also to create a similar linkage. And this is being called the Capital Markets Infrastructure Project for East Africa. It has been lagging for a while, you're right. But there are certain issues that have not been cleared, and that's what's been holding us back. But I think we're going to make progress in phase 2 of this project. And very soon you'll be able to see a trading and clearing settlement system for the East African market. That will allow us to trade in Uganda seamlessly, Tanzania seamlessly, and even avoid the currency exposures that we currently have to do by converting to dollar and then to Uganda shillings and vice versa. So I think it's a journey. In Europe, it has evolved to a level where they now have one exchange. It's called the Euronext. And I think that's the aspiration that one day, even in East Africa, we'll have one exchange, one East African exchange, which will be owned by Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and Rwanda, and all East African members, so that we can have one market and all benefit from the integration and really have investors across all the regions. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mr. Dindo, for that response. I'll be coming back.
Some of them have borrowed from Europe. Some of them, their equity levels are still low. So now all these are going to affect the entire company balance sheet and its profile. Some of these companies are actually transacting with government. And we have seen government arrears increasing for some of these companies. Some companies have not been paid, and they have delivered to projects to government that they are working in. Now, this grossly undermines their own liquidity position, their own ability to move and perform, but it is also affecting the clients, the real households, the real other savers who would have moved into these companies to invest their savings in there. So I think it is a broader conversation that the stock exchange and capital markets need to engage the entire macroeconomic space and parameter to make sure the environment is more friendly for capital markets to be nurtured and nourished within that broader scope of economic development, and more so at the regional level. Because we still have a lot of systemic threats for the entire investment space. We're even seeing foreigners who may be pulling out of these countries. They are worried about the debt burden that is coming, sovereign debt effects, which of course will translate, already has impacts on corporate debt. So these issues need to be addressed more broadly. We should not be so hostile to what the stock exchange and capital markets have done or not done. Which environment are they operating in? Who else should be in this space? And I like that conversation from Odondo. Who else should we bring in this conversation? Because what they do matters to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fred. That was a very timely response when it comes to our capital markets here in East Africa. We need to kind of let it go and try to see how the market can actually play without any of these very tough restrictions in a market that is still growing. Mr. Ebari, to come back to you on the matter of financial literacy, one of our viewers, Dr. Chisembo, says here that there has been a theorization or theorizing of financial literacy. In other words, everything seems to remain on paper and very little practice has been made in as far as implementing some of the policies that promote financial inclusion and financial literacy. What is the Uganda Financial Literacy Association doing or yet to do in order to have some of these things actually put into practice, especially in terms of investing and saving?
Well, that is a good observation, and I truly agree that a lot still needs to be done, especially in the area of implementation. However, there's some progress that has been made. Having the strategy itself is a big leap towards the right direction. This information has cascaded down to the players themselves. For example, the financial institutions. If you notice now, there has been a sort of a revolution in terms of the products that are being available now to the wider community. Back in the day, for example, banking was really categorized for a few special people. But now also banks are becoming more sensitive to the people that were considered before not worthy of those services. We have had a provision for fintechs to come in that are also helping now in the financial inclusion area. And this also, most of these interventions are actually being made based on the data gathered from some of these activities that are in relation to financial literacy, but also collecting information on ground. So it is true. We still have a long way to go. But as an association, our role really is now to start working with these institutions. Number one, giving them feedback on what is really on the ground, because we are training the last person on ground, and not just training, but also getting their feedback on what they need. Then we work with these institutions, saying, well, this is where the challenge is. We think you need to be more innovative in this area, but then also taking this information to the last person. This is also what is available, for example, from the capital markets or from the USE that is available. And we're not just focusing on capital markets and Uganda Securities Exchange. We are doing the same for insurance. We are doing the same for microfinance institutions. We are doing the same for some of these fintechs. So our role as an association is to make sure this information is cascaded to the last person, but also we are able to gather enough information. Part of our job is to do research and development, but also monitoring and evaluation. Such that decisions are actually made based on data. So we need data from the players, the service providers, taken to the last person down. Also, we need information from the consumer to be able to help the service provider come up with more inclusive and innovative products. So that is our role, really. It's the information both from the service providers, but also from the consumers, and together working with the regulators.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much, Daniel. I think that is a very wonderful response there for Dr. Chisembo in terms of what they're doing practically, working with fintechs and, of course, providing solutions that are practical in terms of financial literacy. Mr. Dundo, my final question to you before we close this segment. We have regulatory challenges that, for example, Dr. Fred has already pointed to in terms of how our authorities, the capital markets authorities, are handling, for example, first of all, the market players and then investors. What do you think the regulators should be doing in order to give the space for the capital markets to grow in East Africa?
So I think the most important thing is that, first of all, that we must establish collaboration. I don't think it's a situation where today you have the regulator and the regulator. I think that's a very, very old-fashioned treatment. It has to be more about collaboration. Now, as you collaborate, you must allow the market to innovate. So what we have done in Kenya here is that some of the products that what has led to some of the success of our products is that the regulator has given us the flexibility to actually develop the product and also frame regulations for it. And we do this under what you call a guidance note. So we come up with a product, we establish from other markets how they're regulated. We then develop a guidance note. We submit that guidance note to the regulator, and they put it through a process, and eventually they are formed into regulations. And that's how we were able to bring in, for instance, the exchange-traded funds into this market. So you must allow the market to innovate. You must allow the players to innovate. We're talking about digitization. If today the regulator was to dictate how the digitization process should happen, I believe we'll all be still stuck in getting approvals, just getting clearances to move. But allow the market to digitize, allow them to come up with solutions, day trading, all these SLB solutions. We developed them and then took them to the regulator for approval under some form of a guidance note. So there has to be collaboration. There has to be a flexibility to allow the market to innovate. There has to be allowing the market to also provide feedback. For instance, if the regulations are so difficult, we need to go back and evaluate them, because we at the market, we are the ones who interact with the clients. If the regulations are so strict, then you can't develop or innovate. And then there's the whole process around ensuring that there's sound compliance
terms of credit, not the equity component of financing. So until our government recognizes the role of equity, and equity not just being who started the business with their own small saving, but rather equity being grown through the capital markets, we are still going to find a challenge of getting the right policies, of getting the right strategies that are required to make sure the capital markets and securities exchange succeed. That must shift. Every time you hear government, it wants to hand out money. It wants to give out envelopes. It wants to create programs within the Bank of Uganda, Agricultural Credit Facility. This is policy development model. This is what. When are we going to realize that people can actually mobilize their money in the private sector? And to do that, let's do our policy and regulatory roles as a government. That must come through. Thank you.
So much, Dr. Fred. I can't thank you enough on behalf of the team here. Mr. Odundo, thank you so very much. And Mr. Daniel here with me in studio. We have had a very, very wonderful discussion, and I hope we shall be engaging even further on some of these very important and critical topics to our individuals and institutions here within East Africa. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And thank you, of course, for Mr. Thieno as well. Mr. Thieno, Andrew, thank you so much for coordinating with the entire team of Smart 24 TV. Definitely, we have had this because of the efforts of the men behind the camera. We're going to take another very short break. I'll let the gentlemen go, and of course we'll be returning with our daily market analysis and of course stock market performances from across the globe. Thank you, and we'll return shortly. Don't touch your dial.